Sarah never expected that a simple leaking pipe would change her life forever. The water had been dripping steadily for 3 days, creating a small puddle under her kitchen sink that refused to dry. She had tried everything: tightening the connections with a wrench she barely knew how to use, placing towels to soak up the water, and even watching online tutorials that only left her more confused. "This is hopeless," she muttered, pushing back a strand of brown hair that had fallen across her face. At 28, Sarah had mastered many aspects of adult life, excelling at her marketing job, maintaining her cozy apartment, and even keeping her small collection of houseplants alive. But plumbing remained a mystery she couldn't solve. After another failed attempt that resulted in water spraying across her favorite blouse, Sarah admitted defeat. She would have to call a professional. Scrolling through local service listings on her phone, she finally settled on Mike's Reliable Plumbing. The reviews were excellent and they promised same-day service for emergencies. "It's hardly an emergency," Sarah told herself as she dialed the number. "But I can't keep living with this leak." To her surprise, a deep, warm voice answered after just 2 rings. "Mike's Reliable Plumbing, how can I help you today?" Sarah explained her situation, trying to sound more knowledgeable about pipes than she actually was. The man on the phone, Mike himself, listened patiently before assuring her that it sounded like a simple fix. "I can be there tomorrow morning around 9. Does that work for you?" he asked. Sarah agreed, relief washing over her. One more night with the dripping sound, and then her kitchen would be back to normal. The next morning, Sarah woke earlier than usual. She quickly tidied the apartment, feeling oddly nervous about having a stranger in her space. She had just finished making herself presentable when the doorbell rang precisely at 9 o'clock. Opening the door, Sarah found herself momentarily speechless. Mike the plumber was not what she had expected. Tall with broad shoulders, he stood with a friendly smile that reached all the way to his warm brown eyes. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and though his blue work shirt was simple, it fit him well enough to hint at the strong physique beneath. "Good morning," he said, his voice matching the one she'd heard on the phone. "I'm Mike. You called about a leaky sink." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware that she was staring. Yes, please come in." She led him to the kitchen, conscious of his presence behind her. "It's been leaking for days. I tried to fix it myself, but it only made it worse." Mike set down his toolbox on the floor and knelt to examine the pipes under the sink. "Don't worry about it. These old buildings have tricky plumbing. Most people wouldn't know where to start." His kindness eased her embarrassment. As he worked, Sarah found herself watching his hands, strong but gentle as they manipulated tools with practiced ease. There was something fascinating about watching someone who clearly knew what they were doing. "Do you live alone?" Mike asked, breaking the silence. The question surprised her. "Yes," she answered cautiously. Seeming to sense her hesitation, Mike quickly added, "I just meant that it's good you called instead of letting the leak continue. Water damage can get expensive." "Oh right," Sarah said, relaxing again. "Yes, I've lived here for about 3 years now." Their conversation continued easily as Mike worked. Sarah learned that he had started his plumbing business 2 years ago after working for a larger company. He asked about her job in marketing, listening with genuine interest as she described her recent projects. There was something about his focused attention that made Sarah feel both seen and heard. Most of her recent dates had spent more time checking their phones than actually listening to her. "Almost done," Mike announced after about 30 minutes. "Just need to tighten this connection properly." As he finished the repair, Sarah noticed how the morning sunlight streaming through her kitchen window caught the angles of his face. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in quite some time. When Mike finally stood up, wiping his hands on a cloth, he smiled with satisfaction. That should do it. No more leaks. Sarah found herself wishing the repair had taken longer. There was something about Mike's presence that filled her small kitchen with a warmth she hadn't realized was missing. The kitchen felt oddly quiet after Mike finished fixing the leak. Sarah stood awkwardly, not sure what to say next. Something about his presence made her apartment feel different, warmer somehow, despite the cool autumn morning outside her windows. "Let me test it to make sure everything's working properly," Mike said, turning on the faucet. Water flowed smoothly with no signs of leaking beneath. "Perfect. Good as new." Sarah watched as he carefully organized his tools, placing each one back into his toolbox with practiced precision. His movements were methodical, showing years of experience and care for his craft. "Do you have many more jobs today?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation going. Mike glanced up with a smile that reached his eyes. "3 more after this. It's a busy day, but I like staying active." "I imagine you see all kinds of homes in your work," Sarah said, leaning against the counter. "That's one of the best parts of the job," Mike admitted. "Every home tells a story. Yours is." He paused, looking around her kitchen with its potted herbs on the windowsill and colorful magnets on the refrigerator. Welcoming. It feels lived in, but in the best way. Sarah felt a rush of pleasure at his observation. Her friends often teased her about her attachment to small, meaningful details in her home. The mismatched mugs she'd collected from various trips, the hand-painted fruit bowl from her grandmother. "Thank you. I've tried to make it feel like home," she said. As Mike continued packing up, Sarah noticed a small scar on his forearm. Without thinking, she asked, "How did you get that?" Mike glanced down at his arm. "This rookie mistake from my first year as a plumber. Learned the hard way that old pipes can have sharp edges." He chuckled. "Every scar is a lesson in this job." There was something refreshingly honest about him. No pretense, no carefully crafted image like the men she met through dating apps. Just straightforward competence and an easy smile that made her heart beat a little faster. Mike stood up, toolbox in hand. "Well, that should take care of everything. The pipes under your sink were actually in pretty good shape aside from that loose connection." Sarah knew this was the moment he would leave. She would pay him for his services, and that would be the end of their brief encounter. The thought left her feeling strangely disappointed. "I should give you my card," Mike said, reaching into his pocket, "in case you have any other plumbing issues." He handed her a simple business card with his company logo and contact information. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending an unexpected jolt through Sarah's hand. She noticed Mike's slight pause, wondering if he had felt it too. "I appreciate the quick service," Sarah said, taking the card and looking at it for longer than necessary. "It's no problem at all," Mike replied, his voice a touch softer than before. "That's what I'm here for." An awkward silence fell between them as they stood in her kitchen. Sarah couldn't help but notice how the morning light highlighted the angles of his face, the way his work shirt stretched slightly across his shoulders when he moved. "I should probably get going to my next appointment," Mike finally said, though he made no immediate move toward the door. "Of course," Sarah nodded, leading him to the entrance. At the doorway, Mike turned to face her once more. "It was nice meeting you, Sarah," he said, her name sounding somehow special in his deep voice. "You too, Mike. Thank you again for fixing my sink." After he left, Sarah returned to her kitchen and leaned against the counter, looking at the business card still in her hand. The apartment felt emptier now, as if his departure had taken something essential with him. She placed his card carefully on the refrigerator, securing it with a magnet. Throughout the day, as she tried to focus on her work from home, Sarah found her eyes drifting repeatedly to that simple white card. She wondered if there might be another small plumbing issue she could discover. Just enough of a reason to call him again. 3 days passed, and Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Mike. She caught herself glancing at his business card on the refrigerator while making coffee or preparing meals. His warm smile and kind eyes had made an impression that lingered long after he'd fixed her sink. On Friday afternoon, Sarah was preparing lunch when she noticed a small puddle forming under the faucet. Her heart raced as she examined it more closely. It wasn't a serious leak, just a slight drip where the faucet met the sink. Under normal circumstances, she might have ignored it or tried fixing it herself. But these weren't normal circumstances. She reached for her phone and Mike's card, taking a deep breath before dialing. When his familiar voice answered, Sarah felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach. "Mike's Reliable Plumbing." "Hi, Mike. This is Sarah. You fixed my sink earlier this week. I seem to have another small problem with my faucet." "Sarah, of course I remember. What's happening with your faucet?" She described the issue, trying to sound concerned rather than hopeful. "I know it's not an emergency, but I was wondering if you might be able to take a look." "Actually, I just finished my last appointment for today. I could stop by in about 30 minutes if that works for you." Sarah agreed, trying to contain her excitement. After hanging up, she rushed around her apartment, tidying things that didn't need tidying. She even changed her shirt twice before settling on a simple blue blouse that brought out her eyes. When the doorbell rang, Sarah took one last look in the mirror, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and went to answer it. Mike stood in the hallway, toolbox in hand, looking even more handsome than she remembered. He wore the same blue work shirt, but today it was paired with slightly nicer jeans. "Thanks for coming so quickly," Sarah said, leading him to the kitchen. "No problem at all. Let's see what's going on with this faucet." As Mike leaned over the sink to examine the drip, Sarah noticed the pleasant scent of his cologne, something subtle and clean. She stood close enough to watch him work but far enough to not seem obvious about her interest. "It's just a loose washer," Mike explained, reaching for a wrench. "Easy fix, won't take more than 10 minutes. "Oh," Sarah said, unable to hide her disappointment at how simple the solution was. "Well, that's good news, I guess." As promised, Mike fixed the drip quickly and efficiently. When he finished, he cleaned his hands at the sink and turned to face her. "All set. Should be good as new now." "Thank you," Sarah said, suddenly nervous. "What do I owe you for this visit?" Mike hesitated, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You know what? This one's on the house. It was such a small fix." "I can't let you do that," Sarah protested. "You took time out of your day to come here." "Really, it's fine," he insisted. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "Unless." "Unless?" Sarah echoed, her heart picking up speed. Mike's confidence seemed to waver momentarily. "Unless you'd consider having coffee with me instead. There's a nice cafe just down the street." The unexpected invitation caught Sarah by surprise, though it was exactly what she'd been hoping for. She felt a smile spread across her face before she could even formulate a response. "I'd like that very much," she said. Relief and pleasure flashed across Mike's features. "Great. Is now a good time, or would you prefer another day?" "Now is perfect," Sarah replied, reaching for her purse. "I was just about to have lunch anyway." As they walked toward the door together, Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest. What had started as a simple plumbing emergency had somehow led to this moment, walking side by side with a man who fixed more than just her sink. He'd awakened something in her that had been dormant for too long. Outside, the autumn air was crisp and clear, matching the new sense of possibility that surrounded them as they headed toward the cafe, their conversation flowing as naturally as if they'd known each other for years instead of days. Coffee at the small cafe turned into a 2-hour conversation that flowed effortlessly. Sarah learned that Mike had started his plumbing business after working for his uncle for years, saving carefully until he could branch out on his own. He listened intently as she talked about her marketing career, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. "I never expected to enjoy talking about pipe fittings so much," Sarah admitted with a laugh as they finally left the cafe. "And I never thought marketing strategies could be so fascinating," Mike replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. That first coffee date led to dinner the following weekend. Mike arrived at her door in a crisp button-down shirt instead of his work clothes, holding a small bouquet of daisies. "These reminded me of your kitchen curtains," he explained, a touch of shyness in his voice that made Sarah's heart flutter. Over the next few weeks, they fell into an easy rhythm of dates and phone calls. Sarah discovered that Mike was a surprisingly good cook, having learned from his Italian grandmother. He invited her to his modest but comfortable apartment where he prepared homemade pasta that put her favorite restaurant to shame. "The secret is in the sauce," he told her as she closed her eyes to savor the flavors. "My nana would never forgive me if I didn't simmer it for at least 3 hours." Sarah found herself opening up more with Mike than she had with any man before. There was something about his steady presence and attentive gaze that made her feel safe sharing her hopes and fears. When she confessed her worries about an upcoming presentation at work, he listened without interrupting, then offered simple, grounding advice. "You know your stuff better than anyone," he told her, his hand warm around hers. "Just talk to them like you talk to me." The presentation was a success, and Mike brought her a small gift the next evening, a delicate silver pen engraved with her initials. "To celebrate your win," he said simply. One rainy Saturday afternoon, they found themselves back at Sarah's apartment after a movie. The kitchen where they'd first met had become their favorite place to talk, cook together, or simply enjoy each other's company. As Sarah prepared tea, she watched Mike leaning against her counter, so at home in her space. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, catching her gaze. "Just how different my kitchen feels with you in it," she admitted. "It used to be just a place to make coffee before work. Now it's what?" Mike prompted gently when she hesitated. "Now it's where my favorite memories are being made," Sarah finished, feeling vulnerable but certain. Mike crossed the small space between them, taking the mugs from her hands and setting them on the counter. His eyes were serious as they looked into hers. "I need to tell you something, Sarah," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I've been fixing people's homes for years, but I've never found anywhere that feels as right as being here with you." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep inside her. Sarah reached up, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingers. "I felt it that first day," she whispered. "Something changed when you walked through my door." Mike's hands found her waist, drawing her closer. Their first kiss was gentle, a soft question that deepened into certainty as Sarah's arms wrapped around his neck. The taste of coffee lingered on his lips, now familiar and exciting all at once. When they finally pulled apart, Mike rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he confessed, vulnerability clear in his voice. "And it scares me how much I want this to work." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as happiness swelled in her chest. "I'm falling in love with you too," she answered, the truth of it ringing clear in her heart. "And for once, I'm not scared at all." 3 months into their relationship, Mike and Sarah had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Weekday dinners at each other's apartments, weekend adventures exploring hidden corners of the city, and quiet moments that meant more than either of them could express. Sarah's friends noticed the change in her, a new lightness in her step, a readiness to smile at small delights that once would have passed unnoticed. "He's really special," she told her best friend Emma over lunch. "It's not just the big things. It's how he remembers exactly how I take my coffee, or texts me good morning even when he has early jobs." What Sarah didn't know was that Mike had been working on a special project in his spare time. In the small workshop behind his apartment, he spent evenings carefully crafting a wooden box from cherry wood, sanding each edge to smooth perfection, and carefully inlaying a delicate pattern around the edges. On their 3-month anniversary, Mike arrived at Sarah's apartment earlier than expected. She was still getting ready, her hair half-styled and wearing her favorite dress, the blue one he complimented on their third date. "You're early," she called through the partially open door. "Give me 5 more minutes." "Take your time," Mike replied, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness she rarely heard from him. "I'll wait in the kitchen." When Sarah emerged, she found Mike standing by her kitchen table, the same table where they'd shared countless meals and conversations. But tonight, something was different. He'd spread a white tablecloth over it, placed a small vase of fresh flowers in the center, and lit 2 candles. "What's all this?" she asked, taking in the transformation of her ordinary kitchen. Mike's smile was tender as he pulled out a chair for her. "I wanted tonight to be special. This table, it's where everything started for us." As they ate the meal he brought, her favorite pasta from the Italian restaurant they discovered together, Sarah noticed Mike seemed distracted, checking his pocket several times when he thought she wasn't looking. After dinner, as Sarah began to clear the plates, Mike gently caught her hand. "Leave those for now. There's something I want to give you first." From beneath the table, he produced the wooden box he'd made. Even in the soft candlelight, Sarah could see the beautiful craftsmanship, the careful attention to detail that was so characteristically Mike. "Did you make this?" she asked, running her fingers over the smooth surface. Mike nodded. "Open it." With careful hands, Sarah lifted the hinged lid. Inside, nestled on a cushion of blue velvet, lay a simple silver key. "A key?" she questioned, looking up at him with curious eyes. Mike took a deep breath, reaching across the table to take her hands in his. "My lease is ending next month," he explained, "and I've been thinking we spend most nights together anyway, either here or at my place." Sarah's heart began to race as she realized what he was suggesting. "Sarah," Mike continued, his voice growing more confident with each word, "I know it might seem fast, but when something feels this right, why wait? I'm asking if you consider us finding a place together, somewhere that could be ours from the start. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as emotions swept through her: joy, surprise, and the deep certainty that this was exactly what she wanted. The key is symbolic for now, Mike explained, his thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. But I wanted you to know how serious I am about building a life with you. Sarah rose from her chair, circled the table, and sat on Mike's lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. Yes, she whispered against his ear. Yes. I want that too. His strong arms encircled her waist, holding her close as relief and happiness flooded his expression. Really? You're sure? Sarah answered him with a kiss, pouring all her certainty into it. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. The kitchen table where it all began, she murmured with a smile. Seems like the perfect place to decide where we're going next. The process of finding their first home together started with excitement. Sarah and Mike spent weekends visiting apartments, discussing neighborhoods, and imagining their future in each space. But as they narrowed down their options, unexpected tensions began to surface. This one is perfect, Mike said enthusiastically as they toured a charming 2-bedroom with large windows and a spacious kitchen. And it's only 10 minutes from most of my regular clients. Sarah nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. It's nice, but it's also 45 minutes from my office. That's a long commute every day. Small disagreements grew into larger concerns. Sarah preferred newer buildings with modern amenities, while Mike was drawn to older homes with character and history. Their different financial perspectives became apparent too. Sarah's marketing career came with a higher salary but also significant student loans, while Mike's business was steadily growing but required continued investment. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day of house hunting, they returned to Sarah's apartment in strained silence. Mike poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, his usual warmth noticeably absent. Maybe we're rushing this, he finally said, the words falling heavy between them. Sarah felt her heart constrict. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we want different things, different lives. His voice was low, almost resigned. You want that high rise with the doorman and the gym. I want a place with a yard where I can have a workshop. That's not fair, Sarah protested. I'm trying to compromise. Are you? Mike challenged, an edge to his voice she'd never heard before. Because it feels like we're going in circles. Sarah turned away, blinking back unexpected tears. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. The journey toward their shared life was revealing cracks in what she thought was a solid foundation. That night, they slept with an uncomfortable distance between them and Sarah's bed. The next morning, Mike left early for work without their usual goodbye kiss. The hours at her office dragged as Sarah replayed their argument, wondering if they'd made a mistake. Maybe they weren't as compatible as they believed. When she returned home that evening, Sarah was surprised to find Mike sitting at her kitchen table, the very table where they'd shared their first real conversation, where he'd given her the symbolic key just weeks ago. I didn't know if you'd come back, she said quietly, setting down her purse. Mike looked up, his expression serious but softer than the night before. This is where we started. Seemed like the right place to figure things out. Sarah sat across from him, the familiar wood grain of the table beneath her fingertips a reminder of all they'd shared. I've been thinking all day, Mike began, about why this is so hard for us. And I realized something. We're scared. Scared? Sarah echoed. Yes. Mike reached for her hand across the table. I'm scared that our differences mean we won't work long term. You're scared that compromising means losing part of yourself. The simple truth of his words struck Sarah deeply. He understood her fears better than she did herself. I don't need a fancy apartment, she admitted, but I do need to know that what I want matters too. It matters to me, Mike said firmly. You matter. What if we stop looking at places that are perfect for either of us and start looking for a place that could become perfect for both of us? Sarah felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Something we can build together. Exactly. Mike's smile returned, the one that had first captured her heart. That's what we're good at, isn't it? Building something solid from the ground up. Sarah rose from her chair and moved around the table, settling onto Mike's lap just as she had the night he'd asked her to move in together. His arms encircled her waist, strong and familiar. I love you, she whispered, even when we disagree. Especially when we disagree, Mike replied, pressing his forehead to hers. That's when we learn the most about each other. On the kitchen table beside them, property listings lay forgotten as they sealed their renewed commitment with a kiss that promised understanding, compromise, and a future worth building together. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows of their kitchen, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The house they had finally chosen was neither the sleek high-rise she had initially wanted nor the historic fixer-upper Mike had favored. Instead, they had found a small craftsman-style home with good bones, reasonable proximity to both their workplaces, and most importantly, enough imperfections to make it uniquely theirs. The kitchen had been their first renovation project. Together, they had torn out the dated cabinets, Sarah designing the layout while Mike handled the installation. The centerpiece of the room was their table, not the one from Sarah's old apartment, but a new one Mike had built by hand, using wood salvaged from the original kitchen cabinets. Every morning, Sarah ran her fingers over its smooth surface, marveling at how it represented the best of both of them. Thinking deep thoughts? Mike's voice came from behind her as his arms slipped around her waist. He pressed a kiss to the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. Just appreciating our home, Sarah replied, leaning back against his solid chest. Do you remember what a mess this kitchen was when we first saw it? Mike chuckled, the sound vibrating against her back. How could I forget? That real estate agent thought we were crazy when we both smiled at those horrible green countertops. We saw the potential, Sarah said, turning in his arms to face him. After a year together, the sight of him still made her heart beat faster. His kind eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw in the mornings, the way his smile seemed reserved just for her. Their life together had fallen into comfortable rhythms. Mike's plumbing business had grown enough that he had hired 2 employees. Sarah had been promoted to creative director at her firm. Their days were busier than ever, but they protected their time together fiercely. I have to get to the Thompson job by 8, Mike said, reluctantly loosening his hold on her. But I was thinking we could try that new Italian restaurant tonight, the one that opened by the park. Perfect, Sarah agreed. I can meet you there after my meeting. As Mike gathered his tools and prepared to leave, Sarah watched him with a quiet happiness that still surprised her sometimes. She had dated many men before him, some more educated, some with more prestigious careers, but none had made her feel so completely understood and accepted. Oh, I almost forgot, Mike said, pausing at the door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Happy anniversary. I know we said we'd exchange gifts tonight, but I couldn't wait. Sarah took the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny silver wrench that caught the morning light. Turn it over, Mike urged. Engraved on the back of the charm were the words, "Where it all began." Oh, Mike, Sarah whispered, tears pricking her eyes. It's perfect. He fastened it around her wrist, his capable hands gentle against her skin, to remind you that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the best stories. Sarah reached up to cup his face, drawing him down for a kiss that expressed what words couldn't quite capture: gratitude, joy, and the deep contentment of having found her place in the world. After Mike left, Sarah lingered in the kitchen, her fingers absently touching the new bracelet on her wrist. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a leaky sink to a shared life full of both challenges and immeasurable rewards. Later that evening, they would sit across from each other at that Italian restaurant. Over candlelight and red wine, Mike would reach for her hand, his expression growing serious. He would tell her he had been thinking about their future, about expanding their family. And Sarah, who had been harboring the same thoughts, would squeeze his hand and share her own dreams of the life they would continue building together. But for now, in the quiet morning light of their kitchen, Sarah simply smiled at the thought of how fixing a broken pipe had led to mending parts of herself she hadn't even known were broken.